Welcome to KRQE's New Mexico News Insiders. Here's Gabrielle Burkhart and Chris McKee. Sponsored by New Mexico PBS.
So we are back here with another kind of year-end reflective, forward-looking episode here for you this week. Keeping with the tradition, Gabby, I should ask you, did anything good or noteworthy happen for you in 2024?
Yeah, I went to a lot of live shows, and I remember one year when you asked me this question, it was on my list to see Turnpike Troubadours, and I finally get to see them.
Yes.
I came to the Rio Rancho Event Center, went there. Also, we took our daughter to the Nutcracker and Dogman the Musical at Popejoy.
Wow, okay.
So
I wanted to go to that with my kid.
Yeah.
I'm determined to help make her appreciate theater, because I showed her the program and she was like, "Oh, when's the movie?" And I was like, "It's not a movie," but it was great. Loved it.
That's cool. Yeah.
What about you?
Theater shows are great to get the kids experienced in a whole different atmosphere. I had a kid. That was in April. So now I have my very first baby boy. Yes. Thank you. Yeah, his name is Colin, and he's doing wonderful. He's now, 8 months old, and just a bundle of smiles and joy. Parenthood has been quite a learning experience. So a lot of fun.
So fun.
Yeah.
Well, we are recording this just to timestamp ourselves before we take some time off at the end of 2024. But you will be listening in the future. So happy 2025. Actually, this might air right at the beginning of 2025. So once again, for this episode, we have to talk about some major events that happened over 2024 and what's ahead for this year. So with a man who's in charge of a lot of the decision making in town, welcome back to the podcast, Mayor Tim Keller.
Good to be back.
Yeah, thanks for being here. This is, I think, now the fourth time we've talked to you, I think, here on the show. So
Something
appreciate
like
your
that.
time.
Yeah, great program. Love the chance to actually have a little longer form discussion.
Yeah, and per usual, we'll cover a lot of ground as long as we have you, but let's start with the same question. Anything noteworthy or something you're particularly proud of, maybe outside of work in 2024?
Well, you threw me off when you said outside of work.
I know.
Because probably your life is a lot of the work that you do.
Yeah, but I think, I have young kids too. So we started middle school. And so now we have, and I love, older parents laugh at this comment I'm going to make because they've all been there. But now we have 2 kids in 2 different schools. And my wife also works full time. And so, that is a major parenting family adjustment to do pick up and drop off. And so I'm just grateful, no one's been left behind. We've made every pick up and drop off. And, but that's been certainly this year has been a big transition as a family. And, also age-wise, you're hitting certain maturity, situations in middle school and bigger kid topics and things like that. And so it's a new phase of life for us.
Yeah, exciting. We have not been there yet. Our kids are still younger, but
I've
I'm not
seen
ready.
Well, I hope you're still, are you enjoying Bluey?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Certainly. Yeah.
So, we're all
Literally
too
was
old
watching
for
last
Bluey,
night.
yet we all love it.
Yeah.
And it's awesome.
Great cartoon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bluey's dad's kind of my hero. So.
He should be everyone's
It is
hero.
really great. I could go on about Bluey, but let's maybe focus here on why we got you here, right? The city of Albuquerque. Lot of topics to cover here. And I think one of the seemingly the biggest topic we hear about the most, if I'm just going to track throughout 2024 and really even the years before, aside from crime, it's certainly got to be homelessness in Albuquerque. We've had you on the podcast, as we talked about, 3 times before. The first time we talked to you, we spent about an hour talking about this whole topic alone itself. There's obviously a lot of history to this one, and I think one of the big points to mention in 2024, since the last time we had you on the show, one of the developments that happened was in the nation's highest court, the Supreme Court. They came back with a ruling essentially saying that cities can enforce ordinances regulating camping on public property. And that does saying that basically that enforcing those rules does not constitute a cruel or unusual punishment, essentially. So to ask you, I know you made some comments essentially when this ruling came out, but has this ruling at all changed any way that your administration for the city handles homeless encampments in the months since the ruling came out? And is it something that might change in the future? Will the city get more strict in enforcing homeless-oriented rules?
Well, I think for us, the this didn't have a whole lot of impact because we already were enforcing those rules, and we were actually already in court for enforcing them. And so what it did do is make that court case go away. So this hasn't really changed much at the city. And so I think that might be surprising on two fronts. People might say, oh, I didn't know you were enforcing the rules. Or they might say, wow, I thought you changed policy or whatever. The reality is we were sort of ahead of this curve from a policy perspective. The challenge is actually the resources to do it. So it's like, there's always a question like, is it the will? We want to make sure we keep our public safe. Are there policies? We've had more or less the same encampment policy since we closed Coronado. That's when everything changed and we started enforcing everything. And then do you have the resources? That is a whole different story. So, we clean about 200 encampments a week. We have, we're housing 900 people every night. We're storing people's personal belongings in a giant warehouse. We are doing so much work every day on both sides of this equation, and it's not even close to the amount that is needed to, make sure that everyone is safe and not living on our street, because it's a bigger problem than the city. And that's why, I think even the Supreme Court was chiming in. We need help on every front. The most important one is treatment. By far and away, fentanyl is the biggest driver of every problem we have in our city, actually. And so there's like treatment, which is state and federal, and then there's like county, and there's all these things. And so it isn't all hands on deck, but the city's there. I mean, we have been working on this issue as a top priority for the last few years. And I do know that there are, roughly 1,000 people every night that would be on our street were it not for both support services, housing, but also enforcement. Because we know our community centers, our schools, these things, most of our roadways, they are free. We have from encampments. We have no major encampments. That is because we do enforcement.
Yeah, and I was going to say, to the resource point, I know we talked about this in the State of the City. You had mentioned this idea of doubling down on resources, and that still sounds like it's part of the problem to address that issue of resource capacity.
Yeah, so and I know you want to talk about more than just this, but maybe let me just take a minute kind of to step back, right? So you've got, say, let's start from an unhoused person on the street, and then let's just think for a second, like what happens after they're unhoused or what could happen, and then what causes them to get unhoused. So first, they're on our street. Until about 18 months ago, there was no transportation for them to get anywhere other than a bus. But literally to take them like from a street corner to a shelter, that didn't exist. Police can take you to jail and fire can take you to the emergency room. Neither of those are helpful in that situation. Now we have our community safety department. They've taken 80,000 calls that our officers did not have to take. And they're also allowed to transport people to a shelter or to a nonprofit or to actually get help. So 18 months ago, like we fixed a huge gap. The other gap was where to take them so they can transport them. And we have lots of options actually during the day from 9 to 5 and on the weekdays. But most of them aren't open late at night or they're not open during the weekend. That is why the gateway is so important. This year also, this is the first year we have opened the gateway 24/7 for emergency drop-off. And we actually have some detox open. So the gateway is now solving for the first time in our city that huge gap. Now we need it to be bigger. So to your point, like we have 50 beds available for detox. We literally need 500, right? And we're taking 80,000 calls from APD. We need the resources to take probably double that, 160,000. So that's the kind of scaling that we're trying to do in the future and next year.
One of the main questions at the center of that Supreme Court decision spoke to the ratio of available beds to people that you have on the streets in a municipality. So you mentioned a few numbers there, but where does the city currently stand with what's available versus how many people we have on the streets?
So we've worked very hard to make sure there's a bed available every night. And we actually have it on a website. You can look it up. Just Google like CABQ, shelter beds, something to that effect. It should show up right away. And on average, we have at least 50 beds open every night. So by that measure, on an individual night, there always is a bed available. There has been, at least. However, if you look at the fact that there's 50 beds available and we know our unhoused population is about 5,000, is there a bed for every person? That's a different question than is there a bed available tonight? I'm delivering on is there a bed available tonight? We need a lot more help to make sure there are actually 5,000 beds available at any given time for every single person.
And then city resources, according to the latest data that we looked at, they're housing roughly 900 people a night, right?
Yeah, so we have, to break this down, we have 600 people every night at the Gateway West. We have about 100 families living in a hotel. We don't like to share the location, but the city has leased it for family unhoused. We're building a teen gateway. It's the youth gateway for unhoused teens. That one's not open yet, but we're building that. And then we have about 300 or so in different versions that are getting care at the gateway every day. And that's actually creeping up to about 500 now. So that number continues to grow now. So that's kind of there's two issues with that. One is we are drastically scaling to try and meet the challenge. That's what we're delivering on. But it's still huge, right? If there's 5,000 people unhoused, that's why we have to do more collectively as a state, a county, and a city.
I think one of the most pronounced areas where you sort of see the presence of just homeless encampments sometimes. You mentioned there's no really large ones like the Coronado Park side, but, we still hear from viewers who particularly point out is in the International District, as you go further east on Central past Louisiana out to Wyoming, Eubank. A lot of people point to that area as just seeing, large crowds or, signs of encampments that are there that may move from hour to hour or day to day. But there's also ACS kind of in the component of that as well. ACS has opened that new building in the International District, pretty near to the Gateway Center. But we still hear from folks even in that neighborhood that there are encampments in the area. As much as you can offer, people will still refuse services. We've seen that with ACS. Are the Gateway Center and ACS headquarters, though, do you feel like ultimately helping address the issue, what people see there on the street?
Well, it's important to remember, if we didn't have those, literally there would be 1,000 more people on our street. So that's just mathematical fact. So you've got to understand that no one is disagreeing that we see these issues all over our city and especially in the Southeast. But if we didn't have ACS and we didn't have the Gateway, our city would be completely overtaken by folks just needing help all over town. So that's one way to look at it. Now, I think the other side is that, again, we address 200 encampments a week. So we're out there doing the work. But to your point, we know statistically only 1 in 4 people will take us up on services. And we also know it is not a crime to be unhoused. So just to be clear, you cannot arrest someone, nor should you, just because they don't have a place to sleep at night. So I think it's also important just to remind folks, this is fundamentally a problem about poverty and about addiction to narcotics. So that's why we need to work on those issues, but also about housing. We're 20,000 units short in housing. And that's why we're working also on rent eviction prevention and rent support and building new housing. We've built about 2,000 new units of housing in the last few years. But here again, it's the same story. The city is stepping up big, 2,000. That is double than the city has ever done before. However, we need 20,000 new units of housing to keep up with demand in the city of Albuquerque. So we're trying to do our part, but we've got to have, a much bigger effort if you actually want to see the number of those folks, go down in that way that you're thinking of and that neighbors really want. And so that's why it's a tough challenge. But I think it's important that we remember, we all have a role to play. And I think what we saw this year is the city is stepping up in a big way, a bigger way than it ever has in its history. We just got to get everyone else to join us and do the same thing.
Last question I have about the Gateway. You've mentioned previously that the goal was for the Gateway Center on Gibson to help about 1,000 people per day by 2025. Is that still the goal? And also, can you give us just a quick recap of how many people that the Gateway is currently housing? And I understand more services were added in 2024, including, like you mentioned, the new sobering center.
Yeah. So we are on target for that 1,000. And as a refresher, you've got about 300 people who are getting forms of treatment on sort of the one wing, if you will, of the gateway. And then you have a series of, we have a women's shelter inside there. We have an emergency shelter there, which is often used for men. And then we have our sobering center, and then we have our 24/7 drop-off. When you add all that up, and when it's full, because we just opened it, you're going to be at about 500 in January and February of 2025, so just in a couple of months. And then the remaining amount we think we're going to get to by opening essentially 200 more beds by the end of 2025. Now, we do need a little bit more funding for that, and so we're grateful to take sort of one step at a time when we're taking chunks of like 100. So that's a good thing, but more or less, we're actually on target for that, and it's desperately needed. It's something also, now people are really interested in this project, but we started this project, the idea that Albuquerque should have a place where people can go 24/7 to get help, that has been a decades-long challenge. And so now we actually have fixed that challenge to the tune of, 50 people. We just got to get it to 500.
Yeah. More work to be done there, certainly.
We'll be right back with more of the New Mexico News Insiders.
Hi, I'm Logan Rader, host of New Mexico Living. New Mexico News Insiders is sponsored by New Mexico PBS.
If you like New Mexico News Insiders, learn more about New Mexico in Focus, a weekly hour-long show analyzing decisions impacting New Mexico statewide. Stream it anytime, anywhere. Visit nmpbs.org and follow them on all social media platforms.
Now back to New Mexico News Insiders.
Let's shift to another topic here. This is one that's also mentioned the International District just recently, but this is one that just came up in December. Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham announcing plans to look for an RFP or request for proposals to redevelop the New Mexico State Fairgrounds, or the Expo site. That's 236 acres of state-owned land in central, right in the central part of Albuquerque, really along Central. So this potentially would involve, quote, housing, commerce, entertainment venues, and more as part of this redevelopment. It could mean moving the state fair right out of the heart of the city as well. You shared your perspective on the day this was announced, but let's talk a little bit about this. What are your thoughts here of Expo just plucked out of the middle of the city and having that chunk of land to turn into something else?
Well, this has been a long-standing kind of fascinating concept and idea. And, some folks may remember I was the state senator for the International District for a couple of terms, and was on 2 state fair task forces to do just this. And so I've been around the block a few times on this. And I think there's a couple of things that come out. Just to build on our theme, the city has put $84 million into the International District. New library, 2 new parks, new police station, ACS headquarters, and a bunch of hundreds of new lights. So, but if you drive through there, you might be like, wow, I didn't think the city put any money in here, right? So here again, we absolutely need an extra zero, like after that investment. And so the idea of the state, because the state fully owns and controls the state fair, the city literally has no influence on this at all. It's even a separate policing jurisdiction. It's a whole thing. So
if you look at the city council district, it's actually carved out of the actual district as well. So
right. Yeah. It's like state sort of sovereign land. So anyway, this for us to have the state invest, $100-200 million in the International District, I think is a great thing. And that's what we need. However, I think it's got to be in step with the community. Because we've done several task forces on what people would like to see, and they want green space, they want mixed use housing. No one wants tons of high density housing in the area that already has the highest density housing in the city, right? People want amenities to make the whole area, to lift up the whole area. And also there's historic buildings in there, and there's the Avenue of the Governors. And I think there's easily ways to accomplish all of this and actually have this awesome sort of main street or town center there. And, the past task forces were really focused on how to redevelop the corners and then make the center sort of green space. And, it doesn't necessarily mean the fair has to leave. The land problem in there is the land that the Racino takes. That's a quarter of the land. So I do think this was, part of my wish list. I think they need to look at how that works, because historically the reason why every task force has not had its plan actually solved or used is because the casino blocked the idea. Now, they have a lease, so no one's doing anything illegal there, but you got to bring them into the fold if you, I think, really want to lift up and utilize the property to the fullest. And the last thing is, we want this fair to stay in Albuquerque. So I realize it could go somewhere else. It is the state fair, and I have zero control over that. But I actually love the fair, and I hope that it can certainly stay in, our state's largest city, which is also centrally located, with all the hotels and all the reasons why we have things like Balloon Fiesta and other things like that. So I think it belongs in Albuquerque. But that's just my opinion as the mayor, and it's really a state decision.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people might look at that proposal and say, well, they should spend those funds to improve that existing area, like you were saying, rather than maybe move the fair outside of the center of the city where you still want people to go and enjoy that
There
space.
was a vision. The best plan I saw was this like Central Park idea. So it was called the Commons, and you kept the Avenue of the Governors and you added soccer fields where the Racino was and a lot of green space. And then, you commercialized and built housing and mixed use on the corners. And then you also didn't have walls. I think part of it is like, it's really like a fortress, and that you'd think, oh, well, that's to keep it safe. But it's totally counterintuitive. If you have an activated community with people everywhere, it becomes safe. And if you have lines of sight in and out for law enforcement, it becomes safe, just like any other place that we enjoy. And so that's the direction I hope it goes. But we'll see. It's up to RFP. So I think it's good to have the discussion. I do really appreciate that. And I also love the urgency. I mean, maybe we could actually get this done. Third time, might actually be beneficial for the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very interesting. Well, let's switch over to, I think, the other big topic we always hear about. That one is crime. There have obviously been plenty of ups and downs, successes, continued concerns. I think just a salient sort of moment is, for example, in August, the State of the State address, right? You're out there, you're talking about some of the big successes that have happened in the wave of crime or on the front of crime here in the city. But, later that evening, a 13-year-old boy was shot and killed in a shooting downtown. And it just goes to show you just sort of that duality there. You can have these good moments and then some really horrible ones that make people really frustrated with the issue. We've reported on crimes involving kids with guns. There have been more recent shootings at there was one at a downtown tattoo shop that really got a lot of people talking, Por Vida Tattoo, where the owner was shot and killed there in the middle of his business. As of this conversation, there hasn't been an arrest related to that shooting. How do you view, though, at this point here, end of the year, beginning of a new one, how do you view the overall problem of crime in Albuquerque and how it's being addressed?
Well, I think we saw this year, similar actually to these other issues, you see us breaking through longstanding walls or barriers or knots. But you also see that we have so far to go. But last year was really pivotal. In a sense that whether it was having that 24/7 drop-off, whether it was finalizing huge housing projects, or whether it was in crime, we have seen about, let's say there's a dozen crime categories, it depends how you count it, half of them are actually going in the right direction. Now, half are not, so that's not lost on me at all. It's also not lost on me that they're coming down from an all-time high, right? So, auto theft is a good example. I mean, we used to be first, meaning worst in the country, and now I think we're fifth or sixth, right? So you can't deny that there is meaningful improvement in that change. But also, who wants to be the sixth worst at anything out of 50, right? So this is, I think, true across the board for crime. So, you see homicides are down now for 2 years in a row. But, one homicide is too many. And so we have a long way to go, but directionally, things started to change this year. And it's also the same with some of the assault numbers and even some of the residential burglaries. However, shoplifting, way up. And now it's about commercial vandalism and windows being broken. There's a rash of this all over our city, all the strip malls around town. So when you think about this, I think what this really shows is we are able to make progress when we're pushing crime in different areas. So that's not essentially saying, oh, everything's great, but it's saying that what changed last year is we're effective. So, for example, our clearance rate for homicide. So in those cases, if you shoot someone in Albuquerque, there's a 95% chance we will catch you and put you in jail. That was not true for the last 10 years. It was like 50%. So this is because of our investments in especially technology, excuse me, and also our work with respect to civilianizing the department, which has freed up officers. So it is gunshot detection. It is all the cameras we have up. It's the license plate readers. But then it's also all the people that are now officers who are investigating crimes that used to be doing things like traffic tickets or reviewing officer videotape. And now we use civilians for that. We use PSAs, we have transit officers, we have open space officers, so that our, full sworn officers can actually focus on violent crime. That's what changed last year, is we saw those two things come together to actually turn some of these things in the right direction for the first time in a decade in our city.
Yeah, we've had Commander Kyle Hartsock on talking about the investments in technology and particularly the clearance rate when it comes to violent crime. Certainly there has been a shift in that area, but I also want to ask you, time stamping again myself, because this next topic we know can change or update on any given day, but the DWI APD scandal obviously was a big deal in 2024. It involves officers who were accused of getting paid to get DWI cases dismissed. It's something our investigative unit has been covering extensively, and as of today, there have been no criminal charges filed. That could change with potential federal indictments. But Mayor, just want to ask you, while we've got you, your thoughts. Were you surprised to see this come out, given that the DOJ had been working on reforms with APD?
Well, it's important to remember this goes back at least 10, if not 20 years. So the investigation and all the incidents and so forth predate pretty much, most people who are involved right now in these respective agencies. Now, there are officers who, of course, have been in the police department that long. And what we did is we said anyone who is involved or potentially involved should not be with the department. And that is now true. So we have actually acted very swiftly to make sure that anyone involved in this is no longer an APD officer. And I think that is in sharp contrast to the FBI, which we know is in charge of the criminal prosecution. So we're all waiting for that, and we all need that as a community desperately. And, they're going to do their thing on their own schedule, and so I respect that and have no control over that. But I do believe that our police department has said, which I think is very rare across the country, we did not wait for that investigation. We said that anyone who's involved in that should not be in our department, and now that's true. So they will have their day in court, and sooner the better, and I'll be as relieved as everyone else to find out the truth of everything that's happened. But to our knowledge, there's no one left at APD that was involved in it.
We have seen, officers resign or take early retirement. These usually happened right before APD was about to interview them for the internal affairs investigation. Do you have confidence that people will be held accountable in this alleged public corruption scheme?
Well, I do, and I think it might be surprising why. It's because the FBI is in charge. I mean, it's not lost on anyone that I think on the one hand, our department has honored what my directive was, which I just stated in terms of no one involved in this should be working at APD. They've honored that, but to actually criminally prosecute people, you need a case that is going to hold up in court, and you also can't have any bias, right? Or they can't be, officers you're in the academy with and things like that. It has to be independent. And this is what the FBI is extremely good at. So I actually have full faith in the FBI. They are also famous for taking a long time to get it right. And I think that is exactly what's happening now.
Okay. I want to shift to another topic. In 2025, one major change that we'll obviously see is a new presidential administration. Donald Trump has talked about mass deportations, prioritizing people committing crimes who are in the country illegally. For context on some numbers here, the Pew Research Center report using estimates from 2022, which includes the most recent population data that we could see, shows an estimate of about 25,000 undocumented immigrants in Albuquerque. That's compared to the roughly 60,000 in New Mexico overall. So here in Albuquerque, question for you, under a Trump administration, we may see a shift in maybe our federal local partners. what, if anything, is your office planning to do when we consider potential mass deportation efforts?
Well, it's something we certainly would not support on its face. That I think is an injustice on a number of fronts with respect to people's families. In that, think of that, 20,000 people. And, I would venture to say most of them are probably working in our restaurants and all around our city. And they also, I would venture to say, have family members who are born here. And so tearing apart families is never a good idea. And so I don't support it. Now, I also know that, we as a city are very clear on this policy. I have been for decades, before the president, during the president's last term, and now. So my stance is pretty clear, and so is the city's. So we feel, confident in a sense of where we're at. There's no debating that for us internally or anything. Now, we don't control the ATF. We don't control ICE. We don't control those things that the president does. So obviously, he may do what he wants to try and do, but I know city resources will not be a part of it.
We did see in 2020 a potential threat, or really in the first Trump term, right? A potential threat of withholding some federal funds to fight crime due to the city's policies, the sanctuary or immigrant-friendly policies that the Trump administration very much highlighted, which in part, in the case of Albuquerque, as I understand, in part prohibits city resources from being used to enforce federal immigration laws. Do you expect this same type of fight to play out under another Trump administration?
Well, it's not our first rodeo, so we're going to be ready. And it actually worked out last time in a sense that we were not impacted in a material way. In fact, most of it was rhetoric and sort of gaslighting, I think is the term. So we'll be ready for that, and we're not going to fall for kind of the bluster. I do know that, I think it's important to know what our policy is, because our policy is very different than, I think, the way that the words that you used make it sound. Meaning, our policy is we do not ask or check or track status of someone's, how they got here and that kind of thing for anyone. That goes for people who are citizens and for immigrants and anyone in between. So there is no data, and we are not allowed to ask those questions. So that's very different than cities who say, like, well, we know all this stuff, but we're not going to do whatever. We do not think it's right as people, as a community, to question or ask for your status to use a library or to go to a hospital or to attend school. And so that's why there's nothing for them to actually go after. Like there is no record of anyone at the city. And so I think we should continue that policy. I don't think it's appropriate to question someone's status when they walk into a city facility. So we're going to continue to not do that. But that also means there's no database or something like that we're hiding. We're not hiding anything because we don't track it.
To be clear, one of the topics that, has been played out on the national stage, and I think people are wondering about locally, is Albuquerque checking status when somebody commits a crime? Like, is that something APD goes and checks immigration status and then, communicates with federal partners?
So that the nexus of where that happens in our state would have to be either at the DA level or at the courts. So our officers do not do that, nor should they, for the same reason. We're not going to have a different police response depending on your status. Now, I think what also people forget, that means if you're committing a crime, we will arrest you and we will take you to jail, right? We enforce our laws regardless. And so it is a complete myth that somehow we don't do something because of status. Remember, we don't ask status. So we are going to arrest you and we're going to take you to jail and we're going to ask for justice in the courts no matter what your status is. And I think that's the way it should be for local law enforcement.
Got it. But criminals or even somebody arrested for a crime pending adjudication shouldn't be worried in Albuquerque about potentially getting deported.
Well, I mean, there are the criminal justice system has numerous entities in it, the DA's office, the courts, and so they're going to do what they're going to do. But when you're arrested, we're not going to check your status.
Got it.
We're just going to arrest you and bring you to jail.
We'll be right back with more on New Mexico News Insiders.
Hi, I'm Monica Wicki, host of New Mexico Living. This episode of New Mexico News Insiders is sponsored by New Mexico PBS. If you enjoy New Mexico News Insiders, check out New Mexico in Focus, a great source for insights about what's happening in our state. Catch their podcast and videos at nmpbs.org or stream it anytime, anywhere on the free PBS app. Now, let's continue to New Mexico News Insiders.
And then 2025, it marks the final year under this term as mayor. You've said on our show before that you do plan to run for a third term to get some of your big projects completed. What is on your main agenda for 2025? If you can give us maybe some of your key goals.
You know, for us, we have seen, I mentioned it before us, I think break through some longstanding hurdles. What we've got to do now is sort of finish the job, and that's what I want to do. I need the Gateway taking care of 1,000 people every night. I need DOJ reform done. We're 99% compliant, but we have 18 months left to go. We have the rail trail project starting that is going to be transformative for our city. I want to see that through. We also have, you know, whether it's economic development in terms of solar manufacturing out at Mesa del Sol, thousands of jobs in the queue that I want to try and make happen. And so these are, to me, they're just unfinished business on major projects. And I wish they would have I wish it would have been, you know, done faster, but we had like a 3-year penalty because of COVID and other things. And so it's just taken a little bit longer. And so I want to see it through and finish the job. And there's fun things too, like, you know, the United Stadium. I mean, that's been a project. I think we've all agreed we need a stadium. We just fight about where, and we're almost done with that. But again, you got to see it through. That's slated for like 2027. You know, so these are the kinds of things that I want to finish. The other one is crime fighting technology. We have transformed our police department's ability to catch bad people and put them in jail, but it's only in like 20% of the city. I want all of Albuquerque to be just as safe as those other parts, and that's going to take a few more years.
You mentioned the United Stadium. Do you see 2025 as the year where things start to take shape out there? I know the city is responsible on the lease agreement side to get a pad-ready site there, but we should also note that the decision and whether or not the site plan approval happens is in a district court case at this point. So do you see it taking shape in 2025?
Well, you know, you never want to predict the timing with respect to the courts. So, you know, but I would hope that in 2025, all the decisions are done, right? The ball should be in the team's field, if you will, to mix metaphors, in 2025, meaning they're ready to go, right? Or the courts shut it down, you know, but that hopefully will be clear in 2025. Now they still have to build it. So that's why you're looking at, you know, what season could it be? It's already 2027. There's no way it will happen sooner. But to get it done with the court process means it's about execution. It's not really a question of if, it's just a question of when.
Last question. Considering your run for re-election, as of this recording, we aren't sure who may throw their name in the race to run against you potentially. But while you're here, why should voters give you a third term?
You know, I think it's because we have shown that we know what to do and we can demonstrate progress. We just need more of it. And I don't think now is a good time to roll the dice on having someone else try and learn how to make that progress. And so I wish actually it would only have taken, I wish I could say that now, but I need a couple of more years. And I think we're showing what you get if you get a couple of more years of our administration. You are going to get one of the best in class homeless and unhoused delivery systems in the Southwest. You're going to get a soccer stadium, you're going to get a rail trail, you're going to get police reform done, you're going to get crime-fighting technology all over our city. There is no doubt in my mind we can deliver on those. We know exactly what to do. We just need a few more years.
Well, Mayor Tim Keller, thank you again for joining us for this wide-ranging conversation, and good luck here in 2025.
Thanks so much.
Thanks again to Albuquerque Mayor Tim Keller. As we mentioned, this is the final year of his second term, but he does plan to run for re-election. And we'll see how this year plays out with all these big projects.
Certainly. And I, for one, am interested to see who is going to come out and run against him. We too, what you were saying in the interview, didn't really hear a whole heck of a lot about, we haven't heard a heck of a lot at this point about who is looking to potentially do that, but certainly know there will be at least one challenger. Thanks for joining us for this conversation. If you are watching on Fox New Mexico, just remember the entire conversation is on krqe.com/podcasts, also our KRQE YouTube channel. And if you've got a story idea, let us know. I'm at chris.mckee@krqe.com, also at Chris McKee TV.
And I'm Gabrielle.Burkhart@krqe.com via email and gburknm on social media. Thank you all for listening and watching, and Happy New Year.